The morning sun beat down on Beatrice Thompson as she stood outside the Methodist church in Sonora, Texas, her hands trembling while she clutched a worn handkerchief, watching Thomas Patterson walk away with his new bride-to-be, the daughter of the wealthiest rancher in Sutton County. Beatrice had thought Thomas loved her, had believed his whispered promises during Sunday socials and afternoon walks along the creek, but when it came time to ask her father for her hand, Thomas had discovered what everyone in town already knew. The Thompson family had nothing left to offer, no land, no cattle, and certainly no dowry worthy of a man with ambitions. It was 1883, and in this part of Texas, a woman without money or property was about as desirable as a horse with a broken leg. Beatrice was 22 years old, educated enough to teach basic reading and arithmetic to the younger children at the schoolhouse, pretty enough that men looked twice when she passed, but poor enough that they kept walking. Her father had died 2 years prior from pneumonia, leaving behind debts that consumed what little the family had managed to scrape together from their failed attempts at farming. Her mother took in laundry and mending to keep them fed, and Beatrice contributed what she could from her meager teaching salary. But there was nothing extra, nothing to entice a husband looking to build his fortune. The rejection from Thomas had been the third such disappointment in as many years. First there had been William, the banker's son, who had courted her sweetly until his father reminded him that marriage was a business arrangement. Then came Henry, who had seemed genuinely interested until he learned the truth about her circumstances. And now Thomas, who had at least had the decency to tell her himself rather than simply disappearing like the others. Beatrice walked slowly back toward the small house she shared with her mother on the edge of town, her pale blue dress dusty from the unpaved streets. The fabric was faded from too many washings, carefully mended at the hem where it had torn. She tried to keep her chin up, to maintain the dignity her father had always insisted upon, but tears stung her eyes and her throat felt tight with humiliation. "Beatrice." Her mother's voice called from the front porch where she was hanging sheets to dry. Martha Thompson was only 45 but looked older, worn down by work and worry. "How was church?" "Fine," Beatrice managed, not trusting herself to say more. Her mother's expression softened with understanding. She had heard the rumors about Thomas courting the Jennings girl. In a town as small as Sonora, news traveled faster than a brush fire in August. "Come inside. I made tea." They sat together in the modest kitchen, the walls bare except for a simple cross and a faded photograph of Beatrice's father. The tea was weak, the leaves reused from yesterday, but Beatrice wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to find comfort in the familiar ritual. "You know," her mother said gently, "there are other ways to live. You do not need to marry. We are managing well enough." "Are we?" Beatrice looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the patched curtains, the table with one leg slightly shorter than the others. "Mother, you work yourself to exhaustion every day. I teach for pennies. This is not managing. This is barely surviving. But we have each other, and our health, and our faith. And apparently that is not enough for any decent man in this town." Martha reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Then they are not decent men. The right person will see your worth, dowry or not." Beatrice wanted to believe her mother, but 3 rejections had taught her otherwise. Men might enjoy her conversation, might appreciate her smile, but when it came to actual marriage, they wanted a partnership that brought them something tangible: land, money, connections. Love alone would not pay the bills or expand a ranch or secure a future for children. That afternoon, Beatrice walked to the schoolhouse to prepare lessons for the coming week. The building was small, just one room with rough wooden benches and a blackboard that was more gray than black from years of use. She loved teaching, loved seeing the children's faces light up when they finally understood a difficult concept, but the position paid barely enough to cover her own expenses, let alone help her mother. She was writing out arithmetic problems when she heard horses outside. Through the window, she saw a group of men dismounting near the general store across the street. Cowboys, from the look of them, trail worn and dusty. They were likely passing through, possibly heading north with a cattle drive or south toward Mexico. Such men were common in Sonora, which sat along several major cattle routes, but these particular cowboys seemed different somehow, quieter and more purposeful than the usual rowdy crews. One man caught her attention. He was tall, lean but strong, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He moved with an easy confidence, helping an older cowboy down from his horse with a gentleness that surprised her. Most cowboys she had encountered were rough men, given to drinking and fighting, but this one seemed different. She forced herself to look away and focus on her lesson plans. Getting distracted by a stranger, especially a drifter who would be gone in a day or two, was foolish. She had already wasted enough emotional energy on men who did not want her. The next day, Monday, brought the usual chaos of 17 children ranging from ages 6 to 14, all crowded into the schoolhouse with varying degrees of enthusiasm for learning. Beatrice was in the middle of explaining long division to the older students when the door opened and a man stepped inside. It was the cowboy from yesterday. Up close, she could see his eyes were a striking shade of green, and despite his worn appearance, there was an intelligence in his gaze that made her straighten involuntarily. "Pardon the interruption, madam," he said, his voice deep and respectful. He removed his hat, revealing hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I am looking for someone who might teach me to read and write properly. I can pay a little, though not much." The children had all turned to stare, and Beatrice felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I teach children during the day, sir." "I understand. I was hoping perhaps you might have time in the evenings. I would not need much, just an hour here and there. I can read some already, enough to get by, but I want to do better. I want to learn proper writing and maybe some arithmetic beyond basic counting." There was no shame in his voice, no embarrassment at admitting his limited education. Many cowboys could not read at all, having spent their lives working with cattle rather than books. The fact that this man wanted to improve himself spoke well of him. "May I ask your name?" Beatrice said. "Fletcher Irving, madam. Most folks call me Fletcher. Mr. Irving, I finish here at 3 o'clock most days. If you want to come by at 4, we could start with an assessment of your current skills and go from there. I charge 25 cents per lesson." She could see him calculating whether he could afford it, and she felt a pang of recognition. She knew exactly what it was like to count every penny, to weigh every expense against basic necessities. "That seems fair," Fletcher said finally. "I will be here at 4 today if that suits you." "It does." He nodded, replaced his hat, and left. The children immediately erupted into whispers and giggles, and it took Beatrice several minutes to restore order. She told herself she was simply taking on a paying student, nothing more, but she could not quite stop the flutter in her chest at the thought of seeing Fletcher Irving again in just a few hours. True to his word, Fletcher arrived at precisely 4 o'clock. The schoolhouse was empty, quiet after the chaos of the day, and Beatrice had prepared some basic materials to test his skills. She had him read aloud from a simple text, then a more complex one, and then had him write a few sentences. His reading was slow but accurate, suggesting someone who had taught himself from whatever materials he could find. His writing was rougher, the letters uneven and his spelling creative, but comprehensible. His arithmetic was surprisingly good, likely from years of calculating cattle numbers, weights, and prices. "You have a solid foundation," Beatrice said encouragingly. "With regular practice, you could improve significantly." "I want to be able to read contracts properly," Fletcher explained, sitting at one of the student benches that was too small for his frame, "and write letters that do not sound like they were written by a child. I am tired of having to rely on others or worry that I am being cheated because I cannot understand all the words." "That is an admirable goal. What do you do for work, Mr. Irving?" "I work cattle mostly. I have been saving to buy my own piece of land, start a small ranch. But I know I will need to handle business matters myself if I want to succeed." They worked together for an hour, Beatrice correcting his spelling and showing him how to form letters more consistently. Fletcher was an attentive student, focused and determined. He asked intelligent questions and remembered corrections the first time. When the lesson ended, he carefully counted out 25 cents in various coins and placed them on her desk. "Same time tomorrow," he asked, "if you wish. Though I should mention, I do not teach on Saturdays or Sundays." "That is fine. I work most Sundays anyway, helping at the Miller Ranch west of town." As he turned to leave, Beatrice found herself saying, "Mr. Irving, may I ask how old you are? You seem quite young to be planning your own ranch." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I am 26, madam. Been working cattle since I was 14, saving every spare penny. I figure another year or two and I will have enough for a small place if I am careful." After he left, Beatrice sat for a long moment, looking at the coins on her desk. 25 cents was not much, but if Fletcher came every weekday, that would be over $1 a week, more than $4 a month. It would make a real difference to her and her mother. Over the next few weeks, Fletcher Irving became a regular fixture at the schoolhouse. Every weekday at 4 o'clock, he would arrive, freshly washed despite his long day of work, and settle into the too small bench to practice his reading and writing. He was an excellent student, improving rapidly, and Beatrice found herself looking forward to their sessions with an anticipation that had nothing to do with the 25 cents he paid. They talked during the lessons, conversations that ranged far beyond grammar and spelling. Fletcher told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about losing both parents to scarlet fever when he was 13, about making his way west because he had heard there were opportunities for men willing to work hard. He described the cattle drives he had been on, the vast expanses of open land, the storms and rivers and endless skies. Beatrice, in turn, found herself sharing things she had told few others. Her father's failed farming attempts, the shame of poverty in a town that valued wealth, her love of teaching despite the meager pay. Fletcher listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, never judging or offering empty platitudes. One evening in late September, after they had been working together for nearly a month, Fletcher surprised her by saying, "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner at the boarding house restaurant sometime. Nothing fancy, just a meal and conversation. I would like to repay your patience with me as a student." Beatrice's heart jumped, but she forced herself to think practically. "Mr. Irving, I appreciate the offer, but I do not think that would be appropriate. People would talk. Let them talk. I am asking you to dinner, not proposing something improper. In a town like this, even dinner can be considered improper if the parties are unmarried." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I suppose you are right. I am not used to small-town ways. On the trail, things are simpler, but I do not want to damage your reputation." She appreciated his understanding, even as she felt a sharp disappointment. The truth was, she wanted to have dinner with him. She enjoyed his company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. But she could not afford more gossip, not after Thomas and the others. As October arrived and the weather began to cool, Fletcher's reading and writing improved dramatically. He could now read complex passages and write letters that were clear and well organized. Beatrice knew she could not justify continuing the lessons much longer. He had learned what he had set out to learn. One afternoon, she watched him work on a writing exercise and felt a tightness in her chest at the thought of not seeing him every day. Somewhere along the way, these lessons had become the best part of her day. She looked forward to his stories, his laugh, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he had ever met, not like she was a poor woman without prospects. "Mr. Irving," she said when he finished the exercise, "I believe you have progressed to the point where you no longer need formal instruction. You read and write well enough now for any business purpose. Continued improvement will come simply from practice." Fletcher set down his pencil slowly. "I see. So this is our last lesson. I could not in good conscience continue charging you when there is little more I can teach you. What if I wanted to keep coming anyway? What if I paid you just to have someone check my work to keep me practicing? That would not be fair to you. You have worked hard for your money." Fletcher stood, too quickly, and the small bench scraped against the floor. He paced to the window, looked out at the dusty street, then turned back to her. "Miss Thompson, I have to be honest with you. These lessons, they have been the best part of my days, but not just because of the learning. I look forward to seeing you. I think about our conversations when I am working. I wonder what you will wear, what we will talk about. I am trying to say this properly, but I do not have the fancy words. I care about you, a great deal." Beatrice stood as well, her pulse racing. "Mr. Irving, Fletcher, I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything yet, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. I would like to court you properly if you will allow it. I know I am just a cowboy with very little money saved, but I am honest and I work hard and I would treat you well. You barely know me. I know you are kind to children who test your patience daily. I know you are educated and intelligent. I know you work hard to help your mother. I know you do not judge a man for not being able to read well. I know when you smile, really smile, it lights up your whole face. That seems like a good start for knowing someone." Beatrice felt tears prickling her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Fletcher, you should know, I have no dowry. My family has nothing. 3 men have courted me and then left when they learned the truth. If you are looking for a wife who can bring something to a marriage besides herself, I am not that woman." Fletcher crossed the room until he stood directly in front of her. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "I do not need your money. I do not want your money. I want you, Beatrice Thompson, exactly as you are. I am building my own future with my own hands. What I need is a partner who is smart and kind and strong enough to build that future with me. Everything else is just details. I do not need your money." The words echoed in her mind, so different from everything she had heard before, from all the careful calculations and disappointed rejections. Here was a man who had very little himself but was willing to share that little with her, not because of what she could bring him, but because of who she was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, you may court me." Fletcher's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen from him. He reached for her hands, then hesitated, and she closed the distance herself, letting him take her hands in his. His palms were calloused from rope and leather, but his touch was gentle. "I will do this right," he promised. "I will speak to your mother, be respectful of proprieties. I am not running off anywhere. I am staying in Sonora, working at the Miller Ranch, saving for that land. You will have time to be sure of your feelings." Over the next weeks, Fletcher proved true to his word. He visited the Thompson house properly. sitting in their small parlor and conversing with Martha while Beatrice served tea. Her mother was wary at first, protective after seeing her daughter hurt so many times, but Fletcher's sincerity was impossible to miss. "He has very little," Martha said to Beatrice after his third visit, "I know. But he seems like a good man. He is, Mother, I know it is fast, but I truly believe it." Martha studied her daughter's face for a long moment, then smiled sadly. "You love him." "I think I might. Is that foolish?" "No, darling. Love is never foolish. Worry about money is practical, but love is what sustains you through the hard times. Your father and I had very little when we married, but we had each other, and those were some of the happiest years of my life." Fletcher courted Beatrice throughout October and into November. They took walks along the creek when the weather allowed, always properly chaperoned by her mother or one of the older ladies from church. They attended Sunday services together, sitting in the Thompsons' pew, and Beatrice noticed the stares and whispers but found she did not care as much as she once would have. Let them gossip. Fletcher Irving looked at her like she was precious, like she mattered. He asked her opinions on everything from politics to poetry. He brought her small gifts that cost little but showed he listened. A ribbon in her favorite shade of blue, a book of poems from the general store, wild flowers he picked on his way to see her. One Sunday after church, Thomas Patterson approached them. His engagement to the Jennings girl had been announced officially, and the wedding was planned for December. "Beatrice," Thomas said awkwardly, "I wanted to wish you well. I heard you are being courted." Fletcher tensed beside her, but Beatrice simply smiled. "Thank you, Thomas. I wish you well also. I hope you understand it was not personal. My family has expectations, business considerations. I understand perfectly. And I have found someone who does not see marriage as a business transaction." Fletcher squeezed her hand gently, a gesture of support and pride. They walked away together, leaving Thomas standing uncertain in the churchyard. "That must have been difficult," Fletcher said when they were out of earshot. "Not as difficult as I expected. He chose his path, and I am glad. If he had chosen differently, I would never have met you." By December, Fletcher had saved enough money to make an offer on a piece of land about 10 miles west of Sonora. It was not a large property, only 160 acres, but it had water access and decent grazing. The price was reasonable because the previous owner had died without heirs, and the bank was eager to sell. On a cold December evening, Fletcher came to the Thompson house with a specific purpose. He sat with Beatrice and her mother in the parlor, looking more nervous than Beatrice had ever seen him. "Mrs. Thompson, Beatrice, I have something important to discuss. I have secured the land I have been saving for. The papers will be signed next week. I am going to build a ranch, start small with cattle I have already arranged to purchase. It will be hard work and the first years will be lean, but I believe I can make it succeed." Martha nodded encouragingly. "That is wonderful news, Mr. Irving. Thank you, madam. But the thing is, I do not want to build this future alone. Beatrice, I know we have only been courting a few months, but I am certain of my feelings. I love you. I want to marry you if you will have me. I cannot offer you luxury or ease. I can promise you hard work and uncertainty, at least at first, but I can also promise you loyalty and respect and love every day for the rest of our lives." Beatrice felt her heart soaring. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Fletcher pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band, no stones or decoration, just a plain circle of gold. "It is not much," he said apologetically. "It is perfect," Beatrice replied, meaning it absolutely. She did not need diamonds or emeralds. She needed exactly what Fletcher offered, love and partnership. They married 2 weeks later in the Methodist church. A simple ceremony attended by Martha. a few of Fletcher's cowboy friends, and some of Beatrice's students and their families. She wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, and carried a bouquet of winter greenery. Fletcher wore his best clothes, which were still work-worn but clean and neatly pressed. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar and comforting. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed her gently, reverently, and Beatrice felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right. This was home. They had no money for a wedding trip, so they went directly to the small cabin Fletcher had been building on their new property. It was rough, just 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and windows covered with oiled paper rather than glass, but Fletcher had worked hard to make it ready. There was a bed frame he had built himself, a table and chairs, a rocking chair he had bought third-hand and repaired. "I know it is not what you deserve," Fletcher said, looking around the sparse space with obvious anxiety. Beatrice took his hand and pulled him close. "It is exactly what I deserve because it is ours. We built this together, Fletcher. This is our beginning." That night they lay together in the bed he had made, wrapped in quilts her mother had given them, and talked about their dreams. Fletcher wanted to grow the herd slowly, sustainably, maybe eventually hire a hand or 2. Beatrice wanted to continue teaching, at least until children came. They planned and hoped and held each other, 2 people with very little except each other, and that felt like more than enough. Martha moved into the cabin with them shortly after the wedding. There was no question of leaving her alone in town, and Fletcher had insisted she was family now. The cabin was crowded with 3 people, but they made it work. Martha helped with cooking and keeping house while Beatrice rode into town 4 days a week to teach. Fletcher worked from dawn until dark, building fences, tending the small herd of cattle he had purchased, making improvements to the property. The winter of 1884 was harsh, with cold winds that found every crack in the cabin walls and snow that made the trip to town treacherous. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been, because every penny went into the ranch. But Beatrice found herself happier than she could remember being. She woke each morning to Fletcher's arms around her. She fell asleep each night listening to him breathe. When he looked at her, she saw love and admiration, never disappointment or regret. In late January, disaster nearly struck. A winter storm came through stronger than expected, and several of their cattle were lost in a ravine, dead from cold and injury. It was a devastating blow financially. Fletcher blamed himself, felt he should have moved the herd to better shelter, should have anticipated the severity of the weather. "We will be fine," Beatrice insisted, holding him while he struggled with guilt and fear. "We still have most of the herd. We will recover." "What if we do not? What if I cannot make this work? I brought you here with promises I might not be able to keep. You promised me love and partnership, and you have given me that every single day. Everything else we face together." Martha added, "My late husband faced failures too, Fletcher. What matters is getting back up and trying again. You are a hard worker and you are smart. You will find a way." Fletcher did find a way. He took extra work at neighboring ranches to make up for the lost income from the dead cattle. He worked 18-hour days, coming home exhausted but determined. Beatrice helped where she could, learning to handle cattle despite her lack of experience, managing the books and accounts with her teaching skills. Spring came finally, bringing new grass and new calves. Fletcher traded work for a young bull that would improve their breeding stock. Slowly, painfully, they began to recover from the winter losses. In April, Beatrice realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She waited another week to be certain, then told Fletcher one evening after supper. He stared at her for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy that startled Martha in the other room. He lifted Beatrice off her feet, spinning her around carefully, his face split by an enormous grin. "We are going to have a baby, truly, truly. I am going to be a father. You are going to be a mother. We are going to be parents." He said it like he could not quite believe it, like he was testing the words. Martha came in to see what the commotion was about, and when she heard the news, she cried happy tears and hugged them both. That night, they lay in bed talking about names and possibilities, about how they would need to expand the cabin, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know they are loved," Fletcher said, his hand resting gently on Beatrice's still flat stomach. "I want them to feel secure, to have opportunities I never had." "They will," Beatrice promised. "We will make sure of it." Through the summer, Beatrice continued teaching despite her growing belly, though she knew she would need to stop eventually. The school board was not pleased about having a visibly pregnant teacher, but they could not find a replacement, so they tolerated it. Fletcher worked on expanding the cabin, adding a third room that would serve as a nursery and eventually as a bedroom when the child was older. The ranch was doing better. They had not made a profit yet, but they were breaking even, and the herd was healthy and growing. Fletcher had developed a reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle, which meant other ranchers sought his advice and sometimes his help, providing additional income. In September, Beatrice stopped teaching. Her pregnancy was too obvious to ignore, and besides, she was too uncomfortable to manage the children effectively. She spent her days helping Martha with household tasks, sewing baby clothes from scraps and hand-me-downs, preparing for the new arrival. On a cold November morning, her pain started. Martha sent Fletcher to fetch the midwife while she helped Beatrice prepare. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Fletcher paced outside, helpless and terrified, while Martha and the midwife worked with Beatrice. Finally, just before dawn, a baby's cry pierced the air. The midwife emerged to tell Fletcher he had a son. He rushed inside to find Beatrice exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket Martha had made. "A son," Fletcher whispered, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with one rough finger. "We have a son." "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names endlessly but never quite decided. Now, looking at his child's face, Fletcher said, James Martin Irving." "James for my father, Martin for yours." "James," Beatrice repeated, testing it. "Yes, that is perfect." Little James was a healthy baby, strong and loud. Fletcher was besotted from the first moment, constantly wanting to hold his son, marveling at every tiny feature. He would sit for hours with James in his arms, talking to him about the ranch, about cattle, about everything and nothing. "You are going to spoil him," Beatrice teased, watching her husband cradle their sleeping son. "That is my right as a father," Fletcher replied with a grin. "Besides, he will be working cattle before you know it. Let me enjoy him while he is small." The winter of 1885 was easier than the previous one. The cabin was warmer with the additions Fletcher had made, and they had enough money saved to buy supplies without constant worry. Martha doted on her grandson, giving Beatrice time to rest and recover from the birth. As James grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to improve. Fletcher bought more land, expanding their holdings. He hired a young cowboy named Pete to help with the daily work, which gave Fletcher more time to focus on breeding and sales. Beatrice kept the books, managed household accounts, and raised James while occasionally tutoring children in town for extra income. By 1886, they were not wealthy, but they were comfortable. The lean, desperate times seemed behind them. Fletcher had proven he could make a success of the ranch through hard work and determination. Beatrice had proven she could adapt to ranch life, learning skills she never imagined needing. In the spring of 1886, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. James was barely a year old, and she felt some trepidation about managing two small children, but Fletcher was thrilled. "Our family is growing," he said, holding her close. "This is everything I dreamed of." This second pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Beatrice knew what to expect. She felt well throughout, managing the household and caring for James while her belly swelled. In December, she gave birth to a daughter they named Lucy Ann. Lucy had Beatrice's coloring, dark hair and blue eyes, and Fletcher's determined chin. If James had made Fletcher a proud father, Lucy made him a protective one. He fretted over his daughter constantly, worried about every small cough or cry. "She is fine," Beatrice would assure him. "She is healthy and strong. She is so small. How can something so small survive in this rough world? The same way we all do, with love and care and determination." As the years passed, Fletcher and Beatrice's ranch prospered. They added more cattle, bought more land when the opportunity arose, built a proper house to replace the original cabin. The new house had glass windows, a covered porch, and 4 bedrooms. It was not a mansion, but it was solid and comfortable, a far cry from the poverty Beatrice had known. Their family grew as well. After Lucy came another son, Henry, then another daughter, Sarah. 4 children in 7 years kept the house lively and loud. Beatrice often thought about those years when she had been rejected for having no dowry, when she had felt worthless and unwanted. Now she had everything that mattered: a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with joy and chaos, a home built with hard work and determination. Fletcher never forgot where he came from, never took their success for granted. He paid his workers fairly, helped neighbors when they struggled, contributed to the church and the school. When young men came looking for work, he remembered being young and desperate himself, and he gave them chances when others might not. Beatrice returned to teaching part-time once Sarah was old enough, holding lessons at their ranch for children whose families lived too far from town. She loved watching young minds develop, loved feeling useful beyond housework and child-rearing, though she loved those things too. One evening in the summer of 1891, when they had been married almost 7 years, Fletcher and Beatrice sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was now 6, already learning to rope and ride under his father's patient tutelage. Lucy was 5, fierce and independent. Henry was 3, quieter than his siblings but observant. Sarah was barely walking, tottering after her older brothers and sisters with determined steps. "You remember when I first came to the schoolhouse asking for reading lessons?" Fletcher asked, taking Beatrice's hand in his. "Of course. You were so serious, so determined to improve yourself. I was terrified. I thought you would laugh at a grown man who could barely write his own name. I would never have laughed. Education is not about where you start, but about the willingness to learn." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink. "I want you to know, these years with you have been the best of my life. Every morning I wake up grateful that you said yes to me, a poor cowboy with more dreams than money. I am the one who should be grateful. You saw me when others only saw the lack of a dowry. You valued me for who I was, not what I could bring you." "I do not need your money," Fletcher said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "I never did. All I needed was you." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable and content. "And I needed someone who understood that love is worth more than gold. We built this together, Fletcher. Everything we have, we built together. And we will keep building. There is so much more ahead of us." They sat together as darkness fell, watching their children, planning their future, grateful for the present. The ranch was thriving, their family was healthy, and they had each other. What more could anyone ask for? The following years brought challenges, as all years do. There was a drought in 1892 that tested their resources and required selling off part of the herd. Fletcher's friend and hired hand, Pete, decided to move on, seeking his own opportunities, and they had to find and train a new worker. Lucy fell from a horse and broke her arm, giving Fletcher gray hairs from worry, though she healed perfectly. Sarah developed a bad cough one winter that lingered for months before finally clearing, but there were triumphs too. James showed a natural aptitude for working with cattle and horses, making his father beam with pride. Lucy taught herself to read before she was 6, inheriting her mother's love of learning. Henry revealed an artistic talent, drawing surprisingly accurate pictures of the ranch and animals. Sarah, the baby, showed signs of being the most stubborn of them all, which both amused and exasperated her parents. In 1894, Fletcher was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association board, recognition of his reputation and success. He worked to improve conditions for all ranchers in the area, pushing for fair prices and honest dealings. Beatrice was asked to serve on the school board, her experience as both a teacher and a mother valuable to educational decisions. They attended church every Sunday as a family, sitting in their own pew now rather than squeezing into borrowed space. Beatrice saw Thomas Patterson occasionally, his hair thinning prematurely, his face showing the strain of living up to his wife's family expectations. He always looked away quickly, perhaps embarrassed by how things had turned out. His marriage, according to town gossip, was civil but cold, a business arrangement that had never warmed into true affection. Beatrice felt no smugness, only a quiet gratitude that she had been rejected, that she had been forced to wait for something real. In the summer of 1895, Martha became ill. She was only 57 but seemed much older, worn down by years of hard work. The doctor diagnosed her with a weak heart and said there was little to be done except rest and hope. She grew weaker through the fall, unable to do much beyond sit in her rocking chair and watch her grandchildren play. Fletcher carried her to the porch every morning so she could feel the sun and breeze. The children visited her constantly, bringing her flowers and rocks and all their small treasures. Beatrice sat with her mother every evening, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. "I am so proud of you," Martha said one October afternoon, her voice thin but steady. "You made a good life, Beatrice, better than I ever could have given you. You gave me everything that mattered, Mother. You taught me strength and dignity. You showed me how to survive with grace. I am glad I lived to see this, to see you happy and secure with a good man. I worried so much after your father died, worried you would end up alone or trapped in a loveless marriage for survival. I found exactly the right person. He chose me when no one else would. He was the only one smart enough to see what he was getting." Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later. They buried her in the church cemetery, and half the town came to pay respects. She had been a quiet woman, but people remembered her kindness, the way she had done laundry for those who could not pay, the way she had never complained about her circumstances. Beatrice grieved but also felt grateful. Her mother had lived to see her settled and happy, had known her grandchildren, had spent her final years in comfort rather than desperate poverty. It was more than many people got. Fletcher grieved too in his quiet way. Martha had welcomed him without judgment, had trusted him with her daughter, had become family. He made sure her grave was well tended, that fresh flowers were placed there regularly. Life continued, as it always does. The children grew and changed. James turned 11 and started taking on real responsibilities around the ranch. Lucy began attending school in town, riding in with her father several times a week. Henry and Sarah still ran wild around the ranch, learning and growing in their own ways. In 1896, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise after 4 years without another child. She was 35 now, older than was ideal for pregnancy, and she worried about complications. But Fletcher was overjoyed, and his confidence helped ease her fears. This pregnancy was harder than the others. She was tired constantly, and her body ached in ways it had not before. The doctor told her to rest, but rest was difficult with 4 active children and a ranch to help manage. Fletcher hired a woman from town to come help with housework, insisting that Beatrice focus on staying healthy. In February of 1897, she gave birth to twin girls. The labor was long and dangerous, and there were moments when both Beatrice and the babies were in jeopardy. But the midwife was experienced, and after a terrifying 12 hours, both babies were born healthy if small. They named them Emma Rose and Grace Marie, and Fletcher looked at his wife holding their twin daughters with something like awe. 6 children, he said softly. We have 6 children, Beatrice. We have been busy, she replied with a tired smile. Are you all right? Truly, I am exhausted and sore and happier than I can express. We have 6 beautiful children, Fletcher. 6 reasons to be grateful every day. The twins complicated life considerably. 2 babies meant twice the work, twice the noise, twice the chaos. But James and Lucy were old enough to help, and they took to their new sisters with enthusiasm. Henry and Sarah were less helpful, more likely to make the babies cry than to soothe them, but they tried. By the time the twins were a year old, the household had settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to thrive, now one of the more successful operations in Sutton County. Fletcher had achieved the dream he had worked toward since he was 14 years old, and he had done it through honest work and determination. One day in 1898, a young man came to the ranch looking for work. He was thin and dusty, his clothes worn, his manner nervous. He could not have been more than 18, clearly new to ranch work. I am willing to do any job, sir, the young man said. I work hard and I do not cause trouble. I just need a chance. Fletcher studied him, seeing perhaps a reflection of his younger self. What is your name? Daniel Foster, sir. You ever worked cattle before, Daniel? No, sir, but I am willing to learn. I learn quick. Where are you from? Arkansas originally. My family lost our farm and I have been drifting trying to find work. Fletcher glanced at Beatrice, who was standing in the doorway watching. She smiled slightly and nodded. She knew what he was thinking, knew he saw himself in this desperate young man. All right, Daniel Foster, I will give you a trial. You will sleep in the bunkhouse, eat with the hands, and you will work harder than you ever have in your life. In return, I will teach you the cattle business, pay you fair wages, and treat you with respect. Betray that trust and you are gone. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I will not let you down. After Daniel had been shown to the bunkhouse, Beatrice came to stand beside her husband. You are a good man, Fletcher Irving. I was him once, desperate, willing to do anything for a chance. Someone gave me that chance, several people did. I am just passing it on. This is why I love you. You remember where you came from. Fletcher pulled her close, right there in the yard where anyone could see, and kissed her forehead. I remember because you remind me. Every day you remind me what matters. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle, but the people in our lives, the family we build. That evening, sitting around the dinner table with all 6 children, Fletcher looked at each face and felt overwhelming gratitude. James, now 13, was already taller than his mother. Lucy, 11, was reading a book even while eating, her food cooling as she got lost in the story. Henry, 9, was drawing on a scrap of paper with a stubby pencil. Sarah, 7, was telling an elaborate story to anyone who would listen. The twins, Emma and Grace, just over a year old, sat in their high chairs making a mess of their food and each other. This was wealth, Fletcher thought. Not land or cattle or money in the bank, though those things were helpful. Real wealth was this: a table full of family, a wife who loved him, children who were healthy and growing. He had started with nothing but determination and a willingness to work. He had found a woman who had been rejected for having no dowry, and together they had built something beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, noticing his expression. "Just counting my blessings," Fletcher replied, "realizing how lucky I am." "We are lucky," she corrected. "Both of us. We found each other when we needed to." "I do not need your money," Fletcher said quietly, repeating those words that had changed everything. Beatrice smiled, remembering that day in the schoolhouse, the moment when she had realized this man was different. "And I do not need anything but you." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own mixture of challenges and joys. James grew into a capable young man, taking on more responsibility until he was essentially running the ranch alongside his father. Lucy earned a scholarship to attend a teaching college, following in her mother's footsteps. Henry's artistic talent developed to the point where he sold drawings and paintings to people in town. Sarah declared she wanted to be a doctor, an ambitious goal for a girl, but her parents supported her dreams. The twins, Emma and Grace, grew from babies into mischievous children who seemed to share a single mind, always getting into trouble together and defending each other fiercely. Fletcher and Beatrice watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror. Parenting 6 children was never boring, never easy, but always rewarding. They made mistakes, lost their tempers, worried constantly, but they also laughed together, celebrated victories, provided comfort during defeats. In 1905, James married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a practical young woman who loved cattle as much as he did. The wedding was a grand affair by Sonora standards, held at the ranch with seemingly half the county in attendance. Fletcher and Beatrice hosted it all, their home and land finally large enough to accommodate such celebrations. Watching his son marry, Fletcher felt the passage of time acutely. It seemed impossible that the tiny baby he had held in wonder was now a man, starting his own family. But there was joy in it, too, in seeing the next generation begin their own journeys. "We are getting old," he said to Beatrice that night after all the guests had gone home. "We are in our 40s. That is hardly ancient. I have gray in my beard. You have laugh lines around your eyes. Those lines come from 20 years of smiling. I earned every one of them." Fletcher pulled her close, dancing slowly in their bedroom to music only they could hear. "I love you, Beatrice Irving. I have loved you since the day I walked into that schoolhouse, though I did not realize it at first. Every day since has only increased that love. I love you too. You gave me everything I did not dare dream of: a home, a family, a partnership built on respect and affection. You saw me when others looked right through me. They were fools. I was the smart one, recognizing a treasure when I found it. They danced in the darkness, 2 people who had started with nothing but each other and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The ranch was successful. Their children were thriving, and they had each other still, even after all these years. Lucy came home from teaching college in 1906 and announced she was engaged to a lawyer from San Antonio. Fletcher was skeptical about a city man until he met the fellow and realized he truly loved Lucy and respected her intelligence. The wedding was different from James's ranching celebration, more formal and refined, but no less joyful. Henry moved to Austin to pursue art seriously. Scary for his parents who worried about starving artists, but he managed to support himself with commercial work while creating his more personal pieces. Sarah, true to her declaration, began studying everything she could about medicine, planning to attend medical school despite the obstacles facing women in that field. The twins were still young, only 9 years old in 1906, but already showing distinct personalities despite their identical faces. Emma was the bold one, always ready to try something new or challenge authority. Grace was more thoughtful, the planner who figured out how to accomplish what Emma dreamed up. Together, they were a formidable team. In 1907, James and his wife presented Fletcher and Beatrice with their first grandchild, a boy named Fletcher James after his grandfather and father. Holding his grandson, Fletcher felt the strange sensation of life cycling forward. This baby would grow up on this land, learning these same lessons, hopefully building on what Fletcher had started. "He has your eyes," Beatrice observed, looking at the baby. "You think so? I just see wrinkles and flailing limbs. Trust me, those are your eyes." Our grandson has the Irving green eyes. Grandparenthood suited them. They could enjoy the baby, play with him and spoil him, then hand him back when he became fussy. It was, Fletcher joked, all the fun with less of the work. Beatrice was a natural grandmother, patient and loving, teaching her grandson the same gentle way she had taught hundreds of students over the years. In 1910, Fletcher turned 50. Beatrice organized a surprise party that was not actually surprising since everyone in the county seemed to know about it, but Fletcher pretended to be shocked for her sake. Nearly 100 people came to celebrate, testament to the respect and affection the Irving family had earned over the years. Standing on his porch, looking at the crowd, Fletcher gave a brief speech. "When I came to Sonora almost 30 years ago, I was a cowboy with barely 2 pennies to rub together. I had a dream of owning land, of building something lasting, but I had no idea how to accomplish it. This community gave me chances. The Miller Ranch gave me work. Miss Thompson, who became Mrs. Irving, gave me an education and so much more. Every person here has contributed to what our family has become, whether through friendship or business or simply being good neighbors. Thank you all." Beatrice added, "And I was a woman with no dowry who had been rejected by every decent prospect in town. I thought I was destined for loneliness, or, at best, a marriage of convenience. Then this stubborn cowboy walked into my schoolhouse and eventually told me he did not need my money. Those words changed my life. Sometimes the best things come when you least expect them, when you have given up hope, so never give up. Your miracle might be just around the corner." The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and food. Fletcher danced with his wife, his daughters, his daughter-in-law, his granddaughters from friends. He talked cattle with ranchers, politics with townsmen, weather with farmers. This was his life, these were his people, and he was content. Later, lying in bed next to Beatrice, both of them tired but happy, Fletcher said, "Can you believe it has been almost 30 years since I asked you to teach me reading? It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. If I could go back and tell my 26-year-old self what was coming, I never would have believed it. I hoped to own some land, maybe run a few cattle. I never imagined all this." What would you tell him? Your younger self, Fletcher thought about it. I would tell him to be patient. That the woman in the schoolhouse is going to change his life, but he needs to be brave enough to take the chance. I would tell him that poverty is temporary but character is permanent, and to never compromise his values for quick money. I would tell him that the years go by faster than he thinks, so pay attention to the small moments, not just the big milestones. That is good advice for anyone, Beatrice said softly. What would you tell 22-year-old me? I would tell her that being rejected is a gift, because it means those men were not worthy of her. I would tell her that her worth is not measured in dowry or property, but in kindness and intelligence and strength. I would tell her that a cowboy is coming who will see her true value, and she should take a chance on him even though it seems risky. I never thought it was risky. From the moment you said you did not need my money, I knew you were different. They held each other in the darkness, comfortable after so many years together. Their bodies had changed, marked by time and work and childbearing, but their connection had only deepened. They knew each other's thoughts, finished each other's sentences, worked together seamlessly after decades of partnership. The next morning brought Daniel Foster to the house, the young man Fletcher had hired on years ago who had worked his way up to foreman. Boss, we have got a problem with the fence line on the north pasture. Looks like someone cut it deliberately. Fletcher sighed. Even after all these years, there were still challenges, still problems to solve. But that was ranching, that was life. You dealt with what came and kept moving forward. Let me get my boots on and I will come take a look. As he prepared to face another day of work, Beatrice brought him coffee and a biscuit. Be careful out there, always am, and be home for supper. Lucy and her husband are coming. I will be here. He kissed her cheek, a habitual gesture after so many years, and headed out to deal with the fence problem. Watching him go, Beatrice felt the same warm affection she had felt 20-plus years ago. Fletcher Irving had given her everything she never knew she needed, and she had given him the same. They had built this life together, brick by brick, fence post by fence post, child by child. The years continued their steady march forward. Sarah, against considerable odds, was accepted to medical school in 1912. It was a huge accomplishment, and the whole family celebrated. Fletcher worried about his daughter in the big city, but Beatrice reminded him that they had raised her to be strong and capable. The twins finished school and shocked everyone by both wanting to run a business together. They opened a general store in Sonora in 1914, using money they had saved and a loan from their father. The store thrived. The twins combined energy and intelligence, making them formidable businesswomen. James and his wife had 3 more children, giving Fletcher and Beatrice 4 grandchildren from that branch of the family. Lucy and her husband had 2 children. Even Henry, the artist in Austin, married and started a family. The Irving family tree was growing, spreading, establishing deep roots in Texas soil. In 1916, with America heading toward involvement in the Great War, Fletcher was 66 years old and officially retired, though he still spent every day on the ranch, unable to truly stop working. James ran things now, making decisions and managing the business, but Fletcher was always there to offer advice or just to help with physical labor because sitting still made him restless. Beatrice was 65, her dark hair now almost entirely gray, but still beautiful to Fletcher's eyes. She had given up teaching years ago but still tutored occasionally and served on various community boards. Her days were full of grandchildren, church activities, and managing the household that still bustled with activity. One evening in early 1917, they sat together on the porch swing Fletcher had built years ago, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for over 3 decades. "You have any regrets?" Beatrice asked suddenly. Fletcher considered the question seriously. "Not real regrets, no. There are things I might have done differently, risks I could have taken or avoided. But the big decisions, the important ones, I feel good about. Marrying you was the best choice I ever made. Starting this ranch, raising our children here, building this life, I am proud of all of it. You." No regrets. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Thomas or one of the others had married me, but then I realize I would have been miserable. I needed someone who valued me for myself, not for what I could bring. I needed you, Fletcher. Everything else grew from that." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching darkness fall. Somewhere in the house, they could hear the twins laughing about something. James and his family were staying for dinner, so there would be children's voices soon. This was their legacy, not just the land and cattle, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured and grown. "I do not need your money," Fletcher said softly, repeating those words one more time. "I know you never did. That is why I loved you. And I loved you because you saw me, really saw me, not just a cowboy but a man with dreams and potential. You took those dreams seriously. We made them real together." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Fletcher reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From a desperate 13-year-old orphan to a successful rancher, husband, father, and grandfather. From a man who could barely write his name to someone whose opinion was respected throughout the county. And beside him every step of the way had been Beatrice, the woman with no dowry who had been worth more than all the gold in Texas. Life had not been easy. There had been hard times, losses, struggles, and sorrows. But there had also been joy, love, accomplishment, and deep satisfaction. They had built something lasting, something that would continue after they were gone. Inside, a grandchild called for them and they rose together, still holding hands to join their family. The house was full of noise and warmth and life, exactly as it should be. This was what mattered. This was what they had worked for. Years later, when both Fletcher and Beatrice had passed on, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved them, the story of their courtship became family legend. The cowboy who did not need money, and the woman with no dowry who built a legacy that lasted generations. Their descendants would tell the story at family gatherings, embellishing some details, but keeping the essential truth. That love and partnership matter more than wealth, that character is worth more than property, and that sometimes being rejected is the best thing that can happen because it frees you to find what you were truly meant to find. The Irving Ranch continued, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapters to the story. But it all traced back to that day in 1883 when a determined cowboy walked into a schoolhouse asking for reading lessons, and a rejected woman said yes to teaching him. Neither of them knew it then, but that simple transaction would change both their lives forever, would create a love story for the ages, would prove that the best things in life cannot be bought or inherited but must be earned through honesty, hard work, and the courage to see value where others see only lack. And in the church cemetery in Sonora, Texas, 2 headstones sit side by side, marking the graves of Fletcher Irving and Beatrice Irving, born years apart, united by chance, separated only by a few months at the end as first he and then she passed peacefully in old age. The inscriptions are simple, just names and dates, but visitors who know the story understand that those simple stones mark something extraordinary. A love that transcended poverty, that built something lasting from nothing, that proved money is not everything and sometimes is not anything at all compared to finding the right person to share your life with. Their great-great-grandchildren still work the land, still tell the stories, still benefit from the foundation Fletcher and Beatrice laid more than a century ago. The original cabin is long gone, replaced by newer structures, but the land remains, as does the family, as does the story of how it all began with a cowboy who needed reading lessons and a woman who needed someone to see her value in the end. That is what love does. It sees what others miss. It values what others discard. It builds when others tear down. Fletcher saw Beatrice's worth when everyone else saw only the lack of a dowry. Beatrice saw Fletcher's potential when he was just another dusty cowboy looking for work. Together, they proved that the best partnerships are built not on what you have but on who you are and what you are willing to become together. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Fletcher and Beatrice Irving are together still, watching over the family they created, the land they nurtured, the legacy they built from nothing but love and hard work, and the courage to believe in each other when no one else did.